So thank you, Christopher, and it's great to be here. So my name is Ulrika Hasselgren, and I'm happy to moderate this session on the topic of can nicotine be a sustainable investment? That sentence is actually filled with emotions, I would say. And because what is nicotine? What is sustainable investment? Myself, I've been in the industry of sustainable investment since the late 90s. For those of you who are not familiar with sustainable investment, it's an investment discipline that considers environmental, social, corporate governance factors into the investment process and decision making. And the purpose is to generate long-term competitive financial returns and a positive societal impact. However, as soon as we open up for a discussion, what is sustainable investment among investors and other stakeholders, it's just opening up Pandora's box, because there are so many definitions, there are so many views, there are so many philosophies and approaches. And looking around the world, it varies greatly. 20 years ago, I had the opportunity to get into the space of sustainable investment and the finance industry. Back in 2000, the state pension funds of Sweden, the EPHI funds, were required by the Swedish parliament to take environmental and ethical considerations into account without harming the overall goal for high performance. It was sort of a one-liner from the Swedish parliament to all the EPHI funds. Back then, many investors in the space of ethical investing or sustainable investing were focusing mainly on avoiding certain stocks, certain sectors, such as tobacco, such as alcohol, gambling, and the likes. However, one of the AP funds, AP7, took a completely different route, because they said that these businesses are legal. And as a state pension fund, and at the time, Sweden, being an owner in some of these businesses, they took another route. So they said, we want to focus on international norms for human rights, the environment, labor standards, and corruption. So they did something completely different. And today, many investors around the world embrace sustainability and responsible ownership through ESG integration and many different engagement activities and dialogue with companies of concern, of risk, and of opportunity. So we're seeing an environment around the world that has all of these different approaches and views. And I think that tobacco, alongside alcohol or gambling or weapons, they've all often been dealt with by investors as an ethical issue, a subjective matter. I like it, I don't like it, I want it, it's high risk, it's low risk, just remove it. However, what we're seeing today with these, we can call them controversial areas or products, they're being viewed not only from an ethical investment perspective, but also from many different perspectives, such as health, human rights, the environment, climate, and now also very much focusing on the changing regulatory landscape. So I think that our discussion today is, of course, not about tobacco. It's about post-tobacco. It's about nicotine. So what is nicotine? Well, I am by no means an expert, but I know it's a chemical that contains nitrogen, which is made by several types of plants, including the tobacco plant. So having that type of discussion with an investor just there will then lead to, oops, tobacco. So is that right? Is that wrong? Is there different views on this? So I'm really delighted to have this conversation with all of you, and I think that you can all post questions, so please go ahead. I have been given a mobile phone from Christopher, where His daughter will ask about tonight's dinner, but also there will be questions coming through from the audience. So I'll try to navigate also using this. But I'm delighted to have three experts on this panel. Gavin O'Dowd, you're CEO of Hype Group. Erik Eliasson, you are Head of Responsible Investment of Danske Bank. Malin Lindfors-Spies, you're CEO of Ethos International. And I've asked my three colleagues here in this discussion to give us an introduction on who they are, what they do, and what's on their mind with regards to this topic. So they're going to be, I'll give you 5-6 minutes, depends on how interesting you are. No, I'm just kidding. But please share, take your time and share some of your views. And then once we've done that, I have many questions. And you might have many questions. We'll get into a good discussion. And I like to keep it as informal and as sharp as possible. So to stretch our thinking and maybe get some new ideas and some new perspectives. So by that, I'm going to give the floor to you. Gavin, please share your thoughts.
Thanks, Ulrika. Firstly, to everybody, my name is... Sorry, I'm hearing a little bit of an echo. Or... Okay, it's just me. First, hi everybody, my name is Gavin O'Dowd. I'm the CEO of Hype Group, and I've been here for just over 4 years. Prior to joining Hype, I worked in the industry, in the tobacco industry for 9 years before this. And many of the discussions that we're having at this point in time were ones where, even if they weren't necessarily being openly discussed to the same extent 10 years ago or 12 years ago, there were certainly ones that I can resonate with. If I stand back and take a look at what our purpose is here as a company, and this is the one thing that binds all aspects of our businesses together, of our business together here. It's very much around what we define as our higher purpose. And this is inspiring healthier enjoyment to millions. Simply put, this is finding people who use more harmful forms of tobacco and nicotine, predominantly smoking, and moving them to substantially safer forms, historically more so towards snus, but in the last couple of years, much more so towards nicotine patches. Now, this journey we recognize is not going to be a simple journey, and this is not something that we in isolation are going to be able to do. And we've gone through various stages of growth and reflective thinking over the years, and I'm not quite foolish enough to think that we've gotten to the last stage yet. There's going to be incremental stages of this left ahead of us when it comes to where we are. But it's driven a lot of our policies and our positions and our strategy over the last few years. So if we take a look back at probably the first generation of this, which we went through, was a discussion in late 2017. Once we got ourselves quite clear on this concept of inspiring healthier enjoyment to millions, the first aspect we needed to start with was, how do we define healthier? And how much healthier is sufficiently healthy to be able to operate within this space? So we looked at a half dozen of different metrics on this one, but the one that we really settled on was, I think, what's the globally accepted nicotine and tobacco risk continuum. And we were sort of, there's various schools of thought as regards to where one stage starts and another stage ends in here when it comes to the quantification. But we decided that even by the most conservative standards, we were unprepared to sell any product which was more than 5% the harm of a cigarette. And I think that was a unifying aspect within us as an organization, not just for us as a team, but for how we interacted with our suppliers, with our business partners, with our tech providers, etc., to get this quite clear. And actually, a lot of the decisions that we've made over the last 4 years have hinged from that simple statement. The first one of these was very much around our geographic expansion. So we realized that if we wanted to inspire healthier enjoyment to millions, we couldn't do this within Sweden, because Sweden has less than 1 million smokers sitting within it. And actually, as a side note here, the key reason why Sweden has so low of smoking rates is because of the prevalence of harm-reduced products for the last 200 years, and particularly for the last 40 years, which is what's now brought Sweden to having the lowest smoking rates of any country within the OECD. So we recognized we needed to go outside of that, and there was always a balance then as regards to which market would you take first, and the ability to impact the lives of other people, but also within sustainability, we knew that we needed to be able to operate within markets where we had quite a good probability of success as we got to there. So in early 2018, we decided that we would start down this journey where we expanded firstly into Norway. And then when we got into Norway, we realized, okay, we're actually making really good progress here. And then we sat back and thought, could we start launching platforms for other markets? But there was some very difficult and some very heavy discussions there, because there's 183 countries in the world at this point in time which is struggling with tobacco consumption and where it gets to. And the infrastructure we were running with at that point required 16 to 17 weeks for us to be able to enter a new country. And we simply couldn't operate at that speed, because this was going to take us 24 years before we could get to a stage of fully impacting the global aspect here. So we stood back and did some very intense investments so that we could start to launch at a continent-wide approach at that stage. And in late 2019, we expanded firstly across Europe and also across North America, so that we could start to service, guide, and support consumers across those two geographies. Now, we recognize that there's still a substantial number of consumers that don't fall under these geographies, but simply starting off with 35 million smokers in North America, 45 million smokers within the EU, we consider this to be a good starting point for that aspect of to inspire the healthier enjoyment to millions here. However, we also recognize as we're going along this journey that we are very much a small cog in a very big wheel to be able to make this change. And we needed to be prepared to share information heavily within this space. The first one is, obviously, as an e-tailer, we do not make any products, and we never intend to make any products going to the market. But we could recognize that many of the producers and many of the suppliers were struggling with the pace of change which the consumer was demanding, and the different consumer preferences when you went from one geography to another. So we made a conscious call that it was our responsibility to gather the understandings on the consumer, gather the insights on the consumers, and provide this back as services to the producers, so they could understand that for different forms of tobacco smoker today, for example, if it was a menthol smoker, or if it was a capsule smoker, or even if it was a vaping consumer at this point in time, which were the products which most impacted on those consumers, and which of the nicotine pouch products most impacted on those consumers and was most likely to successfully get them away from cigarettes in a sustainable way. So for that reason, we became what started off as a sort of a small seed with a big belief on that insight space, has led to us now being the largest insights provider to the category globally. Now, when we wrap this together, we also recognize that us and the industry, the producers in isolation, can't make this change. We also need to work very closely with regulators. And there's been a lot of stories out there around this category for good reason for the last 40 to 50 years, because this category hasn't always behaved in the best way. And integrity wasn't always shown, particularly in the 70s and the 80s for some of the darker days of this industry. So we took a very clear position here that one of the key principles we were going to operate with was transparency and information for all. So any of the information that we get from our consumers, we're happy to share that with regulators so they can understand what formats, what flavors, what strengths, what impact does that have when it comes to moving people away from cigarettes, away from more harmful forms of tobacco and nicotine. Now, if I kind of bring all of this back together, we see ourselves as having quite a sort of a hub role within this space, but we recognize that we ourselves are not going to be able to make the changes in isolation. We need support from the industry, from society, from regulators, from investors in this space as well. We need everybody to buy into where we're going on this. And we also recognize that we don't have all of the answers that will be manifesting in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, 15 years' time for this space. But so long as we can keep to that principle of that our role is to have a positive impact on the public health of society, then I think certainly all of the complex decisions that I've had to make over the last few years, there was very few that I couldn't hold up against that principle and naturally know what was the right thing to do.
Great. Thank you so much, Gavin. I have so many questions already, but I'm going to keep them to later, and I'm going to give the floor to Malin Lindfors, please.
Thank you. Well, thank you. Thank you for having me here today. It's very interesting to be a part of this quite very pioneering debate, which is one of the reasons I really wanted to be on this panel. First of all, I'm the CEO and senior advisor of a management firm specialized in sustainability. Sustainability as an equivalent to ESG. Same name, different name, same concept. So, if you are more familiar and comfortable with ESG, then that's the word to use. If you're more comfortable with sustainability or sustainable development or corporate sustainability, you name it. I've been active within this segment since 1996. I've worked exclusively with corporations and their sustainability agenda since 2000. Previously in a more social and a broader perspective, but now very dedicated to the development of the mixture between business development and including sustainability into this. On this, I think it's really important that we first dissect sustainable investment. What is what? Sustainable or sustainable development is human rights, the respect of these. It is decent working conditions, fair labor conditions, labor rights. It is environmental protection and environmental management, and combating corruption or anti-corruption, including the governance of these 4 areas. This is sustainability as defined by the United Nations Office for Sustainability, the Global Compact. So this is fairly commonly agreed upon throughout the world. So it's not something just here for the Nordics or just for the European Union. It has previously been known as non-financial aspects or corporate citizenship. This is not true. Sustainability are these 4 areas and how you can integrate them into build your company onto a company that can prosper and exist in balance with the world, with people, together. Looking at then investments, that's the sort of secondary part. So as an investor, you need to first address, has this company met the basic declarations and conventions agreed upon? Has it followed the standards that has been set how companies should operate? Does this company know the material aspects for its company itself? And material aspect of what is interesting and valuable for stakeholders. Stakeholders being the consumers, as being the public, being the investors, being the co-workers, management, anybody on a 360 perspective to the company. But not driven by that agenda, but taking that agenda and saying, where do we have an impact on sustainability? And how does sustainability impact us as a company? So having that dual perspective of looking outwards and inwards. For example, how are we affected by extreme weathers? Or how are we affected by migrant storms? Or how are we affected by many, many multiple of aspects? If a company has these aspects, understood the risks with them, the connection to these risks, has set goals and targets on how to reach the best impact, to mitigate and reduce risks, and then move on this agenda, then it is probably a sustainable company. This is where you come to the point that you have the liberty to say, I would like to invest in this product or not in this product. That is a secondary choice. So onto this, I'm saying post-nicotine, post-tobacco into nicotine, if you are looking at gambling or textile, any agricultural product, you must first look, is it even sustainable as a business? Then you can take the liberty to do your ethical and your choice that you can do. Also, saying sustainable, never get it mixed on having a sustainable behavior. That's when you've gone on a diet and actually changed your ways of life to keep your suggested weight, and sustainable as in something for companies. So there's sustainable behaviors, but there's also sustainable development.
Thank you very much, Malin.
You're welcome.
Great. Erik?
Thank you. And I work at Danske Bank Asset Management, and we manage approximately 100 billion euros on behalf of our customers. And I'm responsible for building the infrastructure needed to integrate sustainability into our investment management processes and into our investment management products. And that means addressing the sustainability risks of our investments, meaning to what extent does ESG aspects impact the value of investments. And then in addition to that, for many of our investment products, we also address the negative impacts and the positive impacts on society. We are doing this through ESG integration, meaning we are building an infrastructure that enable our portfolio managers to have a strong ESG data platform so that they are able to assess the ESG characteristics and the impacts of the companies they invest into. We also build an infrastructure to be active owners, meaning have company dialogues to understand the sustainability risks and impacts, but of course also impact companies towards more a positive development. In addition to that, we are also screening our investments for sustainability risks. We are also adjusting also our investment products also to meet the ethical needs of our Nordic investors, meaning what investments do our clients want to invest into and not. Responsible investments is an area which is now becoming regulated. It is an area that before has been very much up to different asset managers to define what is sustainable, what is the sustainability risks, how should different processes be, and so on. That is now becoming much more firm and also decided from a top-down perspective. In addition to that is also sustainability something which is becoming more and more important for our customers. Even though that for the last 20 years sustainability has been an important topic among Nordic, both institutional and retail investors, I would say that it's an even higher interest now. The demands on asset managers are even higher today than was the case just a few years ago. In addition to that is also sustainability one of the key differentiators between asset managers. So meaning this is one of the areas where asset managers also see that they have the possibility also to differentiate themselves from competitors by having better products, by having stronger processes, by having more aligned setup compared to what customers expect. And that is also why this has also become an area that has grown a lot in focus among banks and asset managers. I think going forward, we will see, as I outlined, the regulation playing a more important role, especially when it comes to definitions. What is an investment product with a sustainable investment objective? What are the actual sustainability risks? What is a sustainable economic activity? And this is, of course, something which is very much welcomed by the industry because it also creates an additional clarity in how sustainability is to be integrated and implemented in investment management processes. And so on. So this is, and then of course, tobacco and nicotine and so on, it is, as Ulrika outlined initially, a topic that has been discussed for many years and is also something which is continuously being discussed because also of the complexity involved in analyzing this topic and then of course also aligning the investment products that we offer with the needs of our customers.
Thank you, Eric. I think great introductions. I think I have so many questions, and I see that there are questions coming in from Christopher's iPhone, in addition to your daughter's. She wants spaghetti. But I want to I want to touch a little bit about, I want to stay within the investment world. Institutional investors is my focus now, because sustainability within investment has mainly targeted or been the sort of the focus for institutional investors, pension funds, banks, large organizations. And in relation to the definition of what's what, I think this is utmost important. And you all touched upon the regulatory landscape and what is, you know, for investors now with the EU Green Deal, the disclosure requirements on investors and fund managers, and the forthcoming taxonomy, which is focusing on the green and the environmental aspects. But there are discussions now to also to add to the social. But my question, how? And maybe you want to start, Gavin, but because I was talking to a hedge fund manager a year ago. He said to me, Rika, I'm not an American guy. I'm not going to save any whales. I don't care about that. I deliver the maximum performance to my clients. However, I would never touch tobacco. So it was kind of a interesting thought. But from your perspective and for each of you, what is the role of investors in helping this industry, these post-tobacco products, to actually move towards the goal of a healthier environment?
Absolutely. I think everybody recognizes the scale of the challenge that we're facing in this. You know, to reiterate, 1.1 billion smokers out there. Just to give some more context on this, you know, over the past 18 months, more people died from smoking than died from COVID. Yet there was substantially less capital put behind solving these issues for smoking than there was for solving the issues for COVID. Now, I'm not obviously, I think there's an opportunity here that if there is a capital inflow to the space, as we see with every other space, it tends to accelerate the pace of change coming through. And I think we do need to accelerate this pace of change. And I think we need to recognize that we as a society have been extremely slow with this. Now, my history lets me down a little bit here, but I think it's 54 years ago since the FDA publicly announced the connection between smoking and lung cancer. And then, of course, particularly over the last 30 years, we saw connections to many other areas coming off this as well. And, you know, each year there's 7 million people dying from this. And simply approaching this from the basis of an investor standing back and saying, it's not my responsibility, kind of similar to the whales per se. It's not my responsibility, I won't save the whales. It's not my responsibility, I won't invest in actually saving the lives of those 7 million people, which is dying each year. I think it's a complex space, and it's really interesting when I go out and have a chat with people on it. And it's really interesting actually the geographic mix on this as well. I think a lot of maturity is starting to come in within the ESG space, where people are grasping that decisions are generally not binary. You need to stand back and understand it takes more than 30 seconds to grasp, is something having a positive impact or negative impact? And that is quite complex. And to be able to take the time, look at the data, look at the science. And this is not something which is unique for tobacco. I think this is something which I recognize in other industries as well, that there's great complexities within it. It's probably within the electric vehicle space as well. There's a broad range of these complexities running in. So I think what we really see is that many investors are now starting to stand back and say, this is, yes, I never would touch tobacco, absolutely. And then having a chat with the likes of us or other people who focus in the harm-reduced space and recognizing actually, not only are they not tobacco, they are anti-tobacco. This is the solution to getting rid of tobacco along the way.
Thank you, Gavin. Eric, on that note, you as an investor, you as an asset manager, talking about being able to impact companies that you invest in through dialogue towards a positive impact. How are you able to move your portfolio companies through a dialogue towards a healthier environment?
So first of all, we of course manage money on behalf of our customers. So what is important to us is of course what is from an ethical perspective important to our customers. And this is something which we have spent some time understanding. where we've also seen that in general in the Nordics, around 80% of asset owners actually have or make ethical considerations around tobacco investments. And those in general mean that you have a lot of investors, because of their investment policy, not wanting to invest into tobacco. And what is of course important then is what is the definition of tobacco and what do you actually put into this concept. And this is something where most asset owners have different definitions, and in general also definitions tend to be relatively vague, which also means that we could have discussions, for instance, like, is nicotine something to be considered as being part of tobacco? But what about making plastic needed for e-cigarettes? Or what about a tobacco sorting machine and so on? Where do you draw the line? And from our perspective, it is of course very important first to determine this binary aspect of what is okay and what is not okay. Once that is done, then we as investors of course have a lot of possibilities to impact the sustainable development of the companies that we invest into, meaning through dialogues with the companies we invest into, also pressure in relation to this sustainable development. And this is something where we're seeing more and more attention in the asset management industry towards that way of working. Because of the fact that just excluding investments is something where you're pretty much leaving the responsibility to someone else, which from a long-term sustainable development perspective is less efficient. What, of course, further needs to be considered in relation to these different definitions is, of course, what regulators and how different regulations within the EU Action Plan on Sustainable Finance actually play out. And there also we're seeing that there will probably be a drift away from what has historically been these ethical considerations into definitions and investment policies and so on more aligned towards the EU Action Plan, which of course also means that what is then being considered as sustainable or different aspects will also then impact the way that we make investments going forward.
I want to ask Malin, on this topic. Gavin wants to inspire to a healthier environment. Eric is going to have an impact on the companies. He's even going to put some pressure on the companies. Regardless of that, some investor will say, I don't touch this, I exclude. And what about exclusion in the area of today, where we can also add another perspective, which is license to operate? Even if you are legal, even if you're doing all the good things, and even if Gavin and everyone else is lovely to their employees and the whole production chain and everything, the society says they have no license to operate. What are you going to do? How are you going to work with these companies? What is your advice?
Well, first of all, it is the...
This is free advice, so listen carefully.
It's absolutely up to... It's the prerogative of each individual investor, if they are managing their own money, to do as they see fit with their own money. Second of all, if you're managing money on behalf of another party, who is a private party, you are now obliged, according to regulation, to ask them on their sustainability preferences. And please note, on their sustainability preferences, not their ethical preferences. That is something you do and you decide on regarding onto what you've put into your responsible investment policy. So that is your choice. Third, if you are dealing with institutional investors, they will have other firm because they are dealing with taxpayers, they may be dealing with pension money, they will have other regulated to deal with. So first of all, you need to pick your investor that suits your company and your product. That's A. B, if you even want to become part of the debate, you need to be sustainable in your core operations. Core operations for somebody dealing with tobacco or herb or candy flavored pouches, actually disregarding the content, is plastic for cases. That's not sustainable. 2, there's woven material for the pouches. Not sustainable. So you need to look through your supply chain just on the casings and the sort of packaging you're dealing with. Transport. What are your numbers? Where are you doing? Where are you shipping? What's going on? Looking at those. All transport is unsustainable, so deal with it. So you need to look at these very, very basic factors. Then look at the content. If the content is herbs or tobacco or any other thing that comes from the ground, i.e. agriculture industry, you will be dealing with massive amounts of pesticides, you will be dealing with child labor, you will be dealing with modern slavery. So have you addressed this? Have you done a human rights due diligence or impact assessment to understand your risks, your connection, and your action plan to mitigate these risks? Once you've done these things, you can even start talking to somebody about sustainability, and then you may be able to have stakeholder dialogues that move forward. I mean, there is the case of Nestlé, which was one of the first sort of sustainability conflicts, where Nestlé were selling baby powder milk in South America, and of course, they were selling this rather than saying, you don't need to breastfeed, that's not good for you. So rather selling sort of to mothers who needed it as a complement or had it as their own choice, they were actively over-promoting it. Bristol Baby Mothers, group of mothers in the UK, started a huge campaign. For years and years, they went through legal battles. The amount of legal costs, pain, agony, and bad press, ridiculous. Finally, they sat down to have an actual multi-stakeholder dialogue, where you actually talk to them. So this is to talk to the NGOs who are looking and addressing at the issues, to have regular, repetitive, and actually in-depth dialogues. That's how you deal with it. But you need to have your basics. Because if you don't have your basics, you'll never be a sustainable company, no matter what you're producing or selling or services. So first, do your homework, then move on to the dialogue.
Gavin, have you done your homework?
Absolutely. I think this is key. And actually, I was going to ask a question this one, Marlon. I guess everybody has their homework done at this stage, though. I don't get the same slice across a range of companies as you guys do, but I'm assuming everybody has gone back at this point in time and really, like I know we spent a lot of time in the last few years really getting ourselves quite clear of, which of the key pillars of the Paris 2030 Accord were we going to stand up towards and how were we going to report it. And actually, it was really interesting when we started to bring the reporting together on it, where we recognized that huge amounts of work, because of getting the culture right, huge amounts of work were moving in the right direction and were being very successful at delivering results. And it was actually quite energizing to then calculate those results and watch them and see how they're performing on a quarter-by-quarter basis as it moves forward. And I think everybody needs to be doing that at this point in time and be prepared to share that. And not just prepared to share in line with the taxonomy that you guys were talking about a moment ago of, particularly within the sustainability space, but also be prepared to share a broader range of KPIs within this space as well. One of the things that we're very proud of course, we work heavily when it comes to environmental sustainability, but one of the spaces which we prioritize well above that is public health. And to actually share our data both with the University of Toronto and the University of Southern Denmark, so that when people can see which consumers were switching away from cigarettes at what points in time in their life and what the probability was for those people to have switched or not switched across the remaining decades that was left, to start to calculate how many human years are being saved each day you get out and operate. And this is one of the most inspiring pieces to do. And I would actually strongly encourage every other company to go above and beyond on this space as well, because it's one of those things that's very energizing for getting out of bed in the morning and really seeing this is what we as a team, what we're doing and what we're driving towards.
On the taxonomy, I would say There are currently no companies who've done it and can have done it because, of course, the reporting for the taxonomy comes with the year-end numbers according to the annual accounts that are delivered at the end and to be published in April. The key problem for anybody dealing with the taxonomy will be dealing with the minimum safeguards that entail you to make a full assessment according to the guiding principles for human rights in businesses as set out by the United Nations and the principles and method designated to deal with, including the OECD guidelines for due diligence processes. This I have seen 6 companies in Sweden do. So I'd say there's quite the number who still have some work to do.
Yeah.
Looking at the reporting consistency, there's approximately maybe 500 companies in Sweden who actually report according to the standards that are required for 2023. There is, on the other hand, 49,000 companies who will be required to report in 2023. So I'd say we still have some work to do.
Absolutely. I agree.
I can also add to that I think there are 2 perspectives here. So first of all, it's about the sustainability risk. So meaning from an investor perspective, what is the likelihood of certain ESG events negatively impacting the value of an investment? And there I think that, as can be seen for most industries with high sustainability risks, that those industries are quite good at managing those risks, so like mining, oil and gas, tobacco, and so on. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is, of course, what negative impact does the industry have on society and what positive. And this is something which is also very, very important to address, and also something from an investor perspective is something which is extremely important to understand. And then, of course, the last part is then how does different regulatory definitions play into this, and in relation to minimum social safeguards, so which also will be increasingly important and could also be criteria which then would make very binary distinctions between what is sustainable and what is not sustainable. So I think there are, from an investor perspective, a few nuances here which are important.
But we have all of Q4 left for this year, so there's huge expectations for everybody to produce an extremely good year-end, if you just catch up and address some issues.
And one of the issues that I want to catch up on, I'm going to read you a quote. There's an organization called Non-Smoking Generation. They say, and I'm going to ask Eric to comment on it first from an investment perspective, quote, "Around the world, the tobacco industry is trying to mislead consumers and decision makers by toning down the health risks of nicotine, as well as highlighting relative risks with various tobacco products." End quote. This is a quote that I think we're familiar with these quotes, and it's very clear. When you get such information or such statement from an organization arguing that that's the case, what would you do?
That topic regarding selling of products is something which is financially material and something that might also impact the value of our investments. So this is something that we would look more into. This is a topic that we need to understand through the use of data, through the use of different analytical tools, through engaging and discussing this topic with any tobacco companies that we might have within our portfolio. So it's something that if we would have investments into those types of companies, we would definitely look into.
So once you're on the stock exchange, Eric might call you for a dialogue.
Absolutely.
But Gavin, what would you say on this quote that the tobacco industry, and I put you now in the tobacco industry for the sake of this discussion,
Okay.
Are you misleading consumers?
I can't speak on behalf of the industry. I will speak for the category that I'm in. In the category we're in, definitely not. And I actually think it's a huge pity that the person who sent this quote in wasn't able to join us today. I think that would have been quite healthy to have a solid dialogue on this space. And it's been this misperception which goes back so far, and I'm talking about going back multiple decades of tobacco and nicotine, right? They've been grouped together, and they've been grouped together for good reason, because up until 15 years ago, there wasn't the science to be able to divide the two, and to be able to say, well, actually, it's aspects. There's two things here. It's aspects of the tobacco plant which causes it's the heavy metals, the nitrosamine sitting within it, which is what's causing the problems. It's not the nicotine itself. Nicotine is a stimulant. It's comparable to coffee, and it needs to be borne in mind on that level. If you have certain aspects of health within you, if you have high blood pressure, if you're pregnant, if you have problems around the pancreas, etc. If there's any of these challenges, you shouldn't have nicotine. You certainly shouldn't have nicotine late into the evening, or it will impact on your sleep. Now, you could pick that exact same list and use it for caffeine. It is a stimulant, and
don't touch my coffee.
We're going to be coming next for that one, perhaps. It is a stimulant running through here. But I think there's a massive risk to those billion people who smoke if we're not prepared to actually go back to what Eric said and bring out the numbers, bring out the science and the data, and actually talk, what is it that's having the impact here on public harm? Is it tobacco being smoked, or is it tobacco-free nicotine or oral tobacco being consumed? And I think we need to be starting exactly in line with what you said. We need to be starting with the data, the science, and working it up from there as regards to what impact is this having on society and public health.
What do you think, Malin, on this topic?
Well, I think you need to have, I would say if you would get that quote from externally, you've not done your stakeholder dialogues. If you've done your stakeholder dialogues, you have an ongoing relationship and dialogue to understand. So as an investor, it also, not only as a company, but also an investor, you need to have these dialogues. Because if you are given that type of information from the side, you've actually not done your job. So I say keep on tabs with your competitors, keep on tabs with the stakeholders. Stakeholders are NGOs, they are any agencies or institutions, they are other investors, co-investors, they are your investors, funds of funds. So you really need to keep tabs on what is going on. And I would say if addressing public health, I mean, that would in a sustainability world be a product safety KPI. That's the end of it. The other sort of 73 KPIs are actually dealing with sustainability. Product safety goes for all products. So that's just one KPI. I find the KPIs regarding fossil materials, child labor, slaves, different types of heavy metals that are in the consumers, and pesticides that are killing the sort of farmers, those are much more valuable from a sustainability perspective, because when you can drive those, you drive sustainable development.
But isn't the case of child labor, forced labor, tobacco farmers, isn't that a key issue?
Yes.
Focus for you. How do you deal with that?
Absolutely, both that and also, and I'll come to in a moment, the point regarding product standards and product quality on this one. So firstly, before anybody, because we understand our responsibility, not just, I know there used to be sort of a mindset, if you went back 10 years ago, of people saying, well, I will behave responsibly from the product reaches my door until forward. We do not take that approach whatsoever. And before anybody is entitled to supply us with any products, we have a very clear set of standards that we demand that they hold up to when it comes to how their products are sourced, where their products are sourced from, and particularly around the child labour space. That's a pivotal aspect coming in. But we also have a second set of standards, and that's around product standards. So before we will sell any of our products on our sites, we take samples from those products and we send them off to Eurofins, which is the leading laboratory service for this category globally. And we get those products tested for the quality of the ingredients to make sure they're up to food level and standards, for the nicotine levels to make sure that nicotine levels are not uncomfortably high, and for all other aspects around the ingredients going into those products. And it's only when we get the clarity from Eurofins that it meets, and I think it's a much higher set of standards than most of the industry will hold in this space, and we're the only retailer which holds these standards. And it's only when we get that stamp of approval from Eurofins that we will allow those products to be sold on our platform. And actually, to drive this forward even further, in the coming few weeks, we're actually planning on publishing some of this data so that society, both the consumers, regulators, etc., can understand, okay, what is the ingredients within these products and what is the variations within them. Because again, it cuts back to that point of not just setting a high standard and demanding everybody keeps to it, but also being quite transparent as regards to where everybody is versus that watermark within the standard.
Great. I want to bring in a few questions here from Christopher's iPhone, and one question is, where in the world do we have the most gain from shifting from tobacco to nicotine? And is it really in those places the industry is trying to launch pure nicotine products? Maybe you want to start?
Yeah. So I think the first thing we've got to comprehend here is that the largest number of smokers anywhere in the world is in China at this point in time. There's almost half of the world's smokers are sitting within that country. Tobacco sales and tobacco management within China is actually it's effectively a state-run organization, the Chinese National Tobacco Company. It's something which the industry has struggled to engage. It's a world of its own per se when it comes to there. But having said that, there's probably other levels of this as well. There's highly populated parts of Asia with sizable sort of smoking rates running through it that haven't been making the progress that the West has, and certainly haven't been making anything close to the progress that we have here in Scandinavia. I think the category has faced the concept of harm reduction has faced a challenge here over the last 10 years. Maybe 15 years even, that a lot of the innovation coming in, first in the form of e-cigarettes, then in the form of tobacco heating products, required an electric device in order to get them going. And those devices were normally being sold at, let's call it 500 crowns or 50 euros roughly as a pricing point going in. Now, the nature of those devices meant that it was prohibitively expensive for poorer nations to make that adjustment. I think one of the key things and one of the key reasons that we believe that nicotine pouches is going to drive forward with this is that you don't have that cost of that initial cost of giving up cigarettes and migrating across to lower products. And actually some of our suppliers have started to test this category now across a range of Asian countries. Pakistan and Indonesia, I know, have been two of them, and a range of African countries with Kenya, Tanzania, and South Africa having come in on this space as well. Because if we really want to make a difference, I think we can definitely get a lot of learnings out of Europe. And even for ourselves, we'd started off within Scandinavia, then expanding across Europe and North America. But we need to be conscious that the vast majority of the world's smokers are not in these continents anymore. It's more of an emerging market space.
Eric?
No, I have nothing to add to that.
Nothing?
To that question.
Okay.
Frankly, product sales is not a sustainability issue, so I could not really care. And I don't actually see it as part of the debate.
Product sales?
Yeah, because
What
this
about
is product sales.
What about product marketing?
Product marketing, and if it is unethical and sort of unlawful marketing or irresponsible marketing, then it would go under sustainability, yes, and that would go back to that, okay, can you actually support the data and the information you're saying? As you are saying, we have a high set of standards that we ask our suppliers to abide by. I would say that is probably the first thing I would tear apart if I was actually going through the company, because that sounds very shallow. Because you need to be able to explain your different levels of tiers, how and what your sort of supplier code of conduct and other standards are based on, how many audits you have done, how many corrective action plans have been completed as revised, and what was the impact from these, and what are your numbers, because yes, every single supply chain has modern slavery or child labor at the end of it, and you need to address, not saying we don't have it, but saying these are the numbers we encountered in tier 5, this is what we did at it. You can look at sort of Nestle, they publish a quarterly child labor report because they do have such huge amounts. Because when it comes to cocoa bean, beans, coffee beans, this is a well-known fact. If you're in the agriculture industry at all, in that. If you're in anything that is dependent on fossil, then you might have problems, because fossil actually comes from making a hole in the ground and then bringing up raw crude oil and then processing this. So you need to say, what are our emissions? These are our scope 1, these are our scope 2, these are our scope 3, this is what we're doing to lowering it. So the answer should never be, we are pushing standards. The answer is always, our standards are, and these are our 5 top actions. That is truthful marketing. That is honest marketing. That is saying what you're doing. Then you can do and address your product sales. I think the number of times I've been to India, Pakistan, and China, I mean, God, if we can get people to stop smoking, that would be lovely, because those fumes are pollution. I mean, you come from there and you sort of shower in the evening and you sort of some mixture between yellow and gray at the bottom of the shower. So yes, they definitely need it, but they're tricky markets. So I would say that's the difference between communication, being honest, and sales.
Eric, tobacco is regulated. New products, nicotine products, are not. So it's a bit of a free space. Is that an opportunity for you to invest while unregulated?
Yes, so now we're back to the fact that we're managing assets on behalf of our customers, which means that the needs and the definitions of our customers is what is most important. And in Danske, we do not invest into tobacco companies. And we have had a lot of discussions whether or not companies then involved, for instance, only in nicotine also should be restricted. And there, on the basis of the needs of our customers, we decided also to restrict those types of companies. So that means that we do not invest into neither tobacco companies nor nicotine companies.
But and this is a question from the audience, wouldn't synthetic nicotine make it more of a sustainable investment?
Then we're back to what do our customers expect us to do? And this is something we are continuously discussing, where the boundaries are. And we have other examples in relation to, for instance, making plastic for e-cigarettes, which has been heavily discussed, in relation to other dual-use components or distribution of different types of tobacco products. And this is always something that will be discussed. And hopefully with the taxonomy, with increased definition from regulators, it will of course also be more harmonization also around where the different boundaries are.
Great. Actually, I have a concluding question, and it's not for my esteemed panel, but it's for the audience. If you're here in the room or online, do you feel that you have gotten a sufficient answer to the question whether nicotine can be a sustainable investment? Yes or no? Or arms? Hands up. Yes? Have you gotten an answer to the question? Or no? And the answer is okay. I'd like to say a big thank you to Malin, Erik, Gavin.
Thank you, Ulrika.
Thank you, Christopher. And thank you all for listening. And
thank you, Ulrika.
Thank you.
It's always, the trouble is always, when it really gets interesting, then you have to be the sorry guy in the room that actually has to say, okay, but now we have to wrap up. When you really zero in on the most important thing, and that is when you look around the corner in the future. But thank you very much for this this contribution. I got a lot better understanding of the concept of sustainable investment and what kind of consequences that would have for actors within this space, and that was important for me, and probably I hope that I speak for more of people in the audience here and that's following us online. So something that I can't really vouch for the sustainability of this licorice, but I can say it is dangerously good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you.